What up, YouTube? Knowledge is self-determination. Back with you guys with some more Black history every day. So today we're going to go back to February 22nd, 1841, when Grafton Tyler Brown, one of California's first African-American painters, is born. Now, that statement is a little bit misleading because it kind of almost implies that he was born in California. However, he was born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. His father was a freedman and was involved in the abolitionist movement. Brown worked for a printer in Philadelphia when he was 14, It was there where he learned the skill of lithography. Brown was African American by birth. His parents, Thomas and Wilhelmina, were two free blacks who had left the slave state of Maryland for the free state of Pennsylvania in 1837. Grafton Tyler Brown, born February 22nd, 1841, was the first of three sons and a daughter, all of whom appear as black in the census of the period. At age 17, he headed west for Sacramento, California, on his own, and worked over the next 2 years as a hotel steward and porter, where the local census, and directory makers described him as black and colored. There, his painting caught the attention of the local paper, which reported in November 15, 1859, quote, we noticed last evening some very excellent painting done by Grafton T. Brown, a servant boy in the St. George Hotel. The lad has never taken lessons, but his execution will compare favorably with that of acknowledged artists, end quote. In a move that changed his life and, it would seem, his color, in 1861, age 20, Brown left Sacramento for San Francisco, where he was hired as an artist by a German printer, Charles Conrad Kuchel. Brown was sent around the West to draw panoramic views of towns, which Kuchel lithographed and sold to the townspeople, many of whom had also paid extra to have their homes and businesses prominently represented. Kuchel died in debt in 1864, and his widow turned over the business to Brown. At age 24, the former black porter owned an established print shop in San Francisco and was one of only 55 lithographers in the entire United States. Whether by chance or more likely by craft, when Grafton Tyler Brown, who had inherited his father's lighter coloring, was enumerated by the San Francisco directory makers for the 1861, and it says that for the 1861, he was listed without the designation colored applied to blacks. In the 1870 census taker called him a mulatto, suggesting he was thought to have only one African American parent. While that same year, the Dun and Bradstreet credit agency called him a quadroon, meaning that he was thought to have a single African American grandparent. In the census of 1880, he was listed as white. Race, the idea that people can be rigidly separated by their looks, proved itself to be quite arbitrary and open to interpretation. Now, in my opinion, there isn't a lot on his life. He wasn't an activist, he wasn't a pioneer for civil rights, as plenty of people that existed during his time were, like Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, people of the sort. Even though some of them were probably little kids at the time when he was making his mark in the world. But by 1889, most of them were adults. I think, in fact, I think Booker T. Washington may have been, or rather, W.E.B. Du Bois was a little bit younger. But in any event, he wasn't someone who was prominent in Reconstruction. He wasn't an advocate for for black rights and things of that nature. He was born in 1841, which means that he at 20 years old, slavery was still a thing in this country. This was before emancipation and before the 13th Amendment. but he doesn't seem to have had a hand or interest in any of those things. And quite possibly, strategically, he probably started downplaying his black roots uh, in order for opportunity, work opportunity, and things like that. The man was an artist. It seems as though his main focus was art, so that's what he I guess that's what he modeled his life around. I guess he didn't want any complications being able to traverse different cities and towns, which if you think about it, was kind of smart because especially during Reconstruction, which is when the Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow laws emerged, it was very dangerous for black people. So if he could say, well, I'm only 1/3 black, you know, I'm only half black, it probably would save him a lot of trouble while he's, you know, traveling these different towns and painting things where if he was black, he would be harassed, probably beat up, jailed, or even killed. It gave him the freedom to move around and be able to do what he loves. So I guess I mean, because I'm not a light skinned dude, so I don't know the hardships that light skinned and or mixed people would have to face. But I can only assume that that no one wants to denounce their own heritage, especially if you're proud to be of a particular heritage. But at the same time, do you allow who you are, your heritage, to stifle your dreams? Or do you try to work around them the best way you can? He never denied being black. I think other people put the stigma of white on him. Anyway, I've digressed a little bit too much. Let me continue, because there's really not much on the man. In 1889, Brown had moved again to Helena, Montana, the gateway to Yellowstone, where he sold his mountain and geyser paintings, largely to the tourist market. The itinerant painter, who had been single his whole life, was joined in Helena by Albertine Espy, a French-born woman, 20 years his junior, recently widowed. Brown gave up art in 1892 for reasons unknown, and together the pair moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, where he worked as a draftsman for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the city of St. Paul. He retired in 1916 and died March 2nd, 1918. His death certificate listed him as white. Over his 75 years, Brown had gone from obscurity and poverty to relative fame as an artist. A price list from the 1880s shows his paintings selling from $35 to $350, which was a lot of money back then. Today, his work fetches prices up to $75,000. He had come from a poor family in Pennsylvania, traveled extensively through the Canadian and American West, and settled in the headwaters of the Mississippi. In the process, he had also changed his race from black to white, a transition helped by his remarkable talents and an artistic career that he launched with British Columbia Scenery in Victoria in 1883. Okay. I mean, there it says that he changed his race from black to white. And that could be possible. He was listed as white on his death certificate, which his wife more than likely was behind the labeling of him being white then. But again, like I said, for him to do the job that he was doing, maybe it was easier for him to be considered white in order for him to travel, around the country the way he did and back and forth between America and Canada and to the racist South, like in Mississippi, without being harassed or even murdered for being black. And to be with a white woman in those days was almost an instant death sentence. Because, again, thanks to Jim Crow, it was, in fact, even before Jim Crow, during slavery, and during Jim Crow as well, in Reconstruction, you couldn't be with a white woman if you were black. It couldn't happen. It was illegal. So again, I'm not going to cast too much judgment on the man because there isn't a whole lot about his life. He was an artist. He obviously loved drawing and painting and loved art. And there's nothing wrong with loving art. We have a ton of great African-American artists in our history. And as time goes on, I'll reveal more of those people to you guys. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and end this portion of Black History Every Day and get to the next video, which will be about Angela Davis. So, see you guys in a bit. What up, YouTube? It's Knowledge of Self-Determination. Back with you guys with some more Black history every day. Today we'll be going back to February 23rd, 1972, when political activist Angela Davis was released from jail. So I'll just go ahead and get right into her life, or some of her life, because she's had a long life and she's done a lot of things. So I won't make this but so long, but I'll put links into the description box for different resources that you could look up when you can take time in your own time and do some more research on it, find out about her very long and successful life. Anyway, so I'll get right into it. Angela Yvonne Davis, born January 26, 1944, is an African American. They always seem to leave out on this one site to note them as African American. She was African American, and I just want to highlight that because this is Black History every month, and I'm telling you guys about Black people. Is an African American political activist, academic scholar, and author. She emerged as a prominent counterculture activist and radical in the 1960s as a leader of the Communist Party USA, and had close relations with the Black Panther Party through her involvement in the Civil Rights Movement. Her interests include prisoner rights. She co-founded Critical Resistance, an organization working to abolish the prison industrial complex. She was a professor, now retired, at the University of California, Santa Cruz, in its History of Consciousness Development, and a former director of the university's Feminist Studies Department. Davis was prosecuted for conspiracy involving a 1970 armed takeover of a Marin County, California courtroom in which 4 persons were killed. She was acquitted in a federal trial. Her research interests are feminism, African American studies, critical theory, Marxism, popular music, social consciousness, and the philosophy and history of punishment and prisoners. Her membership in the Communist Party led to California Governor Ronald Reagan's request in 1969 to have her barred from teaching at any university in the state of California. During the 1980s, she was twice a candidate for vice president on the Communist Party USA ticket. Funny thing about Ronald Reagan, though, he barred her from teaching because of her Communist Party affiliations, and yet he was okay with the selling of crack to Black people in America during the 1980s. I just find that very strange, how righteous a lot of these people seem to act like they are, but like the saying goes, the brighter the picture, the darker the negative. Anyway, sorry for that brief digression. Angela Davis, activist, educator, scholar, and politician, was born on January 26, 1944, in the Dynamite Hill area of Birmingham, Alabama. The area received that name because so many African American homes in this middle-class neighborhood have been bombed over the years by Ku Klux Klan. Now, I wanted to say something to that also. White people have a history of hating on Black people, especially when we find success. They have this thing where, and not all white people, I would say white supremacist racists. Let me classify them as that, because all white people do not act out in this fashion. So I'll label these people white supremacist racists. They have a way of trying to keep us down, keep us under their boot. Anytime Black people, especially in large groups, start to become successful and without the need to be in white America's good favor, they always find a reason or a way to try to destroy that and tear that down, no matter what it is. Like the Black Wall Street, perfect example. These Black men and Black women, these Black business owners, they separated themselves from the white community. You wanted to be segregated? Fine. We'll give you that. And we'll do our own thing. They strive. They excelled at what they did. And white people couldn't handle it. So they had to bomb and blow up what they did and take everything that they could, get their grubby fucking mitts on. Sorry for the language. Get their mitts on and keep for themselves. I'll continue. Her father, Frank Davis, was a service station owner, and her mother, Sally Davis, was an elementary school teacher. Davis's mother was also active in the National Association for the Achievement of Colored People, more affectionately known as the NAACP, when it was dangerous to be openly associated with the organization because of its civil rights activities. As a teenager, Davis moved to New York City with her mother, who was pursuing a master's degree at New York University. While there, she attended Elizabeth Irwin High School, a school considered leftist because a number of its teachers were blacklisted during the McCarthy era for their earlier alleged communist activities. Davis later moved north and went to Brandeis University in Massachusetts, where she studied philosophy with Herbert Marcuse. As a graduate student at the University of California, San Diego, in the late 1960s, she was associated with several groups, including the Black Panthers. But she spent most of her time working with the Che Lumumba Club, which was an all-black branch of the Communist Party. Hired to teach at the University of California, Los Angeles, Davis ran into trouble with the school's administration because of her association with communism. They fired her, but she fought them in court and got her job back. Davis still ended up leaving when her contract expired in 1970. And of course, that was part of the whole Ronald Reagan spiel that I read off to you guys just a while ago. Davis later moved north and went to Brandeis University in Massachusetts, in Massachusetts, where she studied philosophy with Herbert Marcuse. Okay. Sorry about that. Moving along, on August 7, 1970, Jonathan Jackson, the younger brother of George Jackson, attempted to free prisoners who were on trial in the Marion County Courthouse. During this failed attempt, Superior Court Judge Harold Haley and 3 others, including Jonathan Jackson, were killed. Although Davis did not participate in the actual breakout attempt, she became a suspect when it was discovered that the guns used by Jackson were registered in her name. Davis fled to avoid arrest and was placed on the FBI's most wanted list. Law enforcement captured her several months later in New York. During her high-profile trial in 1972, Davis was acquitted on all charges. The incident, nonetheless, generated an outcry against Davis, and then California Governor Ronald Reagan campaigned to prevent her from teaching in the California State University system. Despite the governor's objection, Davis became a lecturer in women's and ethnic studies at San Francisco State University in 1977. Former California Governor Ronald Reagan once vowed that Angela Davis would never again teach in the University of California system. Today, she is a distinguished professor emerita in the History of Consciousness and Feminist Studies departments at the University of California, Santa Cruz. In 1994, she received the distinguished honor of an appointment to the University of California Presidential Chair of African American and Feminist Studies. So, so much for Ronald Reagan. Now, I wanted to read a little bit of this interview that Angela Davis did, and because there were certain things that I wanted to point out or discuss briefly. So the interview starts off. Your mentor, Herbert Marcuse, once back in 1958, he's referring to, as I recall, said that one of the things that would happen as blacks made gains in the civil rights movement was that there would be a creation of a black bourgeoisie, and that's certainly been one of the things that's happened as we look back from the vantage point of 1997. How do you see the role of the black bourgeoisie in the continuing struggle? So Davis answers, actually, we've had a black bourgeoisie, or the makings of a black bourgeoisie, for many, many more decades. If we look at one of our great leaders, W.E.B. Du Bois, he was associated with a very minuscule black bourgeoisie in the 19th century. So this is not something that is substantively new, although the numbers of black people who now count themselves among the black bourgeoisie certainly does make an enormous difference. In a sense, the quest for the emancipation of black people in the U.S. has always been a quest for economic liberation, which means to a certain extent that the rise of black middle class would be inevitable. What I think is different today is the lack of political connection between the black middle class and the increasing numbers of black people who are more impoverished than ever before. And I think that's a good point. Um, that there's a lack of political connection because the black bourgeoisie, or and a lot of people who belong to the middle or upper middle class black community, the bourgeoisie black community, they tend to be the ones that are referred to as coons, people who soft shoeing and tap dancing for white people. They're the ones who get labeled as Sambos. A lot of them, because a lot of them feel as though because they made it to a certain economical financial position, that now they are separate from the rest of the black masses, that they're somehow better than. They kind of almost take on the frame of mind that a lot of white supremacist races or snobby, snooty, upper class white people take amongst the rest of society, that they are better than. They separate themselves from us, they distance themselves from us, but at the same time, they make themselves self-appointed leaders of black people without feeling as though they have to confer with or reconnect with black people. So, and W.E.B. Du Bois was a part of that community, because he had issues with Marcus Garvey. He did not appreciate the fact that Marcus Garvey had quickly rose to prominence in the black community, whereas he wasn't able to gather black people in a way, amass the numbers of followers in the way that Marcus Garvey did. He wasn't able to do that. While he was very prominent in the black community, and he was someone who was a fighter for civil rights for black people and black freedom and liberation, he still had a kind of air to him that he felt as though he was better than certain black people. Like, he didn't necessarily have an issue with Marcus Garvey's Pan-Africanism as much as he did with the fact that it was Marcus Garvey who was leading the Pan-African movement. He kind of had an issue with that because, again, W.E.B. Du Bois was a Pan-Africanist before Marcus Garvey was. Marcus Garvey came on the scene and kind of took the nation by storm with his movement, and W.E.B. Du Bois didn't like that. I think because W.E.B. Du Bois was a very light-skinned black person and Marcus Garvey was a very dark-skinned guy. But that plays all into that Woody Lynch syndrome, where the light-skinned Negro and the dark-skinned Negro are constantly battling and combating each other, vying for a position in the world, when our position is, so far as the white supremacists are concerned, there's only one position to us, and that's to be underneath them. The sooner we can understand that as an entire race of people, we can really start to make progress. Again, sorry for the long digression. I'll continue on. I'm not going to read but so much of this interview because there are just certain things in the interview that I actually wanted to talk about so far as this is concerned. Let's see. Interviewer: isn't that inevitable though? Hasn't every immigrant group, as it becomes part of the American mainstream, left behind its roots in a certain way? Davis: that's true, but I think the contemporary problem that we are facing increasing numbers of black people and other people of color being thrown into a status that involves work in alternative economies and increasing numbers of black people who are incarcerated. This is new. This is not the typical path towards freedom that immigrants have traditionally discovered in the U.S. And the only thing that I would disagree with, and that's not even her whole statement, black people were never immigrants, first and foremost. In fact, let me read her whole answer to that. And I guess what I would say is that we can't think narrowly about movements for black liberation, and we can't necessarily see this class division as simply a product or a certain strategy that black movements have developed for liberation, but rather we have to look at the structural changes that have also accompanied the gains of the civil rights movement. We have to look at, for example, the increasing globalization of capital, the whole system of transnational capitalism now, which has had an impact on black populations. That has, for example, eradicated large numbers of jobs that black people traditionally have been able to count upon and created communities where the tax base is low now as a result of corporations moving to the third world in order to discover cheap labor. I would suggest is that in the latter 1990s, it is extremely important to look at the predicament of black people within the context of the globalization of capital. That's a pretty deep answer, and I would agree. The only thing that I would disagree with is the whole immigrant part. Black people have never been immigrants in this country. There are Africans from all over the world who do migrate to America now, but so far as African Americans are concerned, meaning those of us who were snatched from Africa and brought to the Western Hemisphere during the transatlantic slave trade, the Middle Passage, we didn't migrate over here. We didn't make a choice to come here. We were taken from everything we had known and brought to this land. So that's the only thing I really wanted to argue with that. Angela Davis was a very important part of the civil rights and Black Power movement. She worked on both sides of that. While there were lines drawn between Black Power and the Black Power movement and the civil rights movement, she was a huge part of that, along with Huey P. Newton, Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm X, Assata Shakur. And I don't ever want you guys to ever forget the women who were involved with our struggle and our plight, because there are tons and tons and tons of women that made a huge difference, that are very, very pivotal to the success of Black people as a whole. Remember, these women raise our children, you know? So we have to pay homage and respect to them. It's not just about the men, it's about the women too, who were sometimes stronger than the men. Because while a lot of men who were doing those times, like the Stokeleys and the Hueys and the Malcolms, were out lecturing and touring and putting themselves in imminent danger, the woman was home with the children, facing those same dangers, on top of raising the children, being worried about her husband. And their struggle was just as much or even harder than the man's struggle was. Together, our struggle as Black people is difficult, period. But we have to pay homage and respect to the women. We have to acknowledge their sacrifices and the things that they have done to help support us as a people and to continue to raise strong men, which there seems to be a huge lack of in today's society. But I'm going to go ahead and end this video. I'll leave the links in the description box to different sources that you guys can go to and look up more information on Angela Davis's life, more detailed information, more comprehensive look at her life. She is an author. I don't have any of the names of her books, so it probably wasn't smart to actually name them or say she was an author. But you guys can look that up for yourselves. In fact, yeah, here's some of her books right here. Davis is the author of several books, including Women, Race, and Class, 1980, and Are Prisoners Obsolete, 2003. That's just a couple of her books. But yeah, check out the links in the description box if you guys want more information on the life of Angela Davis, someone who was very active in the Black Panther movement, the Communist Party, the Civil Rights Movement, and the Black Power movement. So I'm going to go ahead and end this video. This is Knowledge and Self-Determination. Like, learn, and subscribe, and I'm out. Peace.